Okay folks, welcome to a special edition about the 189 visa and SkillSelect for January 2019 and for the rest of this program year. Okay, so for December 2018 and January 2019, the department have confirmed to us they gave 2,490 invitations for the 189 visa for each month and 10 for the 489 visa. So it's a big drop from 4,340 in October and November, but still a fairly healthy number. Okay, now our assumptions are 60% of those invites went to pro rata occupations and 40% to non-pro rata. We base that on the fact the department have told us that's their target for the year, 60-40, and so far it's been 57% invites for pro rata and 43% for non-pro rata over the whole year. So it's fair to go 60-40 split from now on. So that means 1,500 invitations roughly went to pro rata occupations in January and 1,000 to the non-pro ratas. You'll see from the table behind me how we've split those up into each of the occupations. Now the interesting thing for the department is so far they have been very consistent with how many of the occupational ceiling is invited for each of the occupations. So for example, for the whole occupational ceiling for ICT business analysts, they've invited so far 45% of those numbers by November. They've also invited 45% of the accountant ceiling, 45% of the auditor ceiling, in fact 45% of every of the pro rata occupations. So that's good news, we think, for accountants, because in the past accountants have been heavily affected by the invitations given to 190s and company sponsorship, and they've been taken out of the accountant occupational ceiling. I'm not saying that's not going to happen, but so far the department have at least given accountants a fair go, and it looks like that's happened right up until January. So hopefully for the rest of the year they don't have their numbers dropped and they continue at the same rate as the other pro rata occupations. Okay, so a wasted invitation. Now that's a really big issue in the current SkillSelect system. Our definition, a wasted invitation, is a term that we've given to an expression of interest for a 189 visa that's invited to lodge an application, and the person doesn't take up that invitation within their allotted 60 days. That invitation then goes back into the EOI pool, or the expression of interest goes back into the EOI pool, and it can be invited for a second time after 60 days. So it still has to wait for its turn to come up for a second time, but after 60 days it's available again, and in fact it will probably get an invite fairly soon because it will be in front of other people at that points level because its EOI is older. So then when it gets invited for a second time, again it can wait 60 days to see if it's accepted. If it's not accepted, that becomes the EOI ceases to exist, and in fact it's wasted 2 legitimate invitations. Okay, now the main reason why a person would not accept a 189 invitation is simply that they don't need that invitation anymore. That's most likely to happen because someone was sitting there with an EOI, they improved their points, they lodged a second EOI for that improved points level, so they get the full 2 years on that EOI, and therefore they don't need the old EOI anymore. They also may have received a 190 invite or a company sponsored visa, so for a number of reasons they don't need it. It becomes an irrelevant EOI in the system, but it becomes wasted if it doesn't get withdrawn out of the system. In fact, it gets wasted twice. Okay, so how many were wasted, or how many get wasted each round? A huge number get wasted each round. The best way to explain it is to go back a few months. In October 2018, the department invited 4,340 people to lodge a 189 visa. Of those, according to the department's figures, around 1,600 didn't take up that invitation. That's a huge amount of what we're now terming wasted invitations. So after 60 days, all those 1,600 then go back into the EOI system, and the December round is heavily affected by those 1,600 wasted invitations. And so quite a lot of December's invites ended up being wasted invitations again from October's people who hadn't accepted their invitation. Similarly, in November 2018, 1,100 people didn't accept their invitations. So 60 days later, those EOIs go back into the system, and in January 2019, a fair few of the invitations, again, would have been out of that 1,100, and again, they're wasted. So that's why we saw such a small movement in December and January for the invitation date, even though there were a lot of invitations, 2,490. It'll be interesting to see what the department's figures are for wasted invitations in December and January, but I expect it's going to be around 35, maybe even 40%. Okay, so, and you'll see on the table behind me, we can actually show you there how many invitations we think are getting wasted in the January round, and probably very similar amount was wasted in the December round. Okay, now some people will see that their occupation invitation date has actually got worse for some of the occupations. So for example, software programmers, the last time they were invited at 70 points was for EOIs lodged up until the 6th of April 2018. That was in November's round. They invited people who lodged their EOI 7 months ago in April at 70 points. Now, in the November round, they invited 1,011 people in their occupation. We think over 400 of those were wasted. That is, people did not take up their invitation. Now, in that November round, the 70-point date moved from January 2018 to the 6th of April 2018. They invited almost 3 months of people at 70 points. Now, 400 of those didn't take up their invitations. So that means a lot of people in January, February, March invitations didn't take those up. They go back into the system in January this year because they've waited 60 days and not taken up their invitation. And so when the department have come along and invited new software programmers in January, we think they've invited, let's see, around about 578 people. They would have invited all the 85 pointers, all the 80, all the 75, and when they got to the 70 pointers, there wouldn't have been many people to invite anymore because there wouldn't be many of the 578 places left, but the ones they did invite were in fact people whose EOIs had been wasted and were back in the system for January and February and March, etc. So in fact, the last 70 pointer they invited was dated on the let's have a look here. On the 17th of January 2018. Previously, they'd invited 70 pointers up until April 2018. So it looks like the date's gone back 3 months because they've had to invite all those wasted people again. So that's the problem with wasted invitations. It's actually taking the invitation date back for some occupations. Auditor, exactly the same. Auditor is really just a disaster. 90% of the people for auditor are wasted invitations at the moment because most of those people have got invited as an accountant already. They're not withdrawing their auditor EOI, and in fact the date for the auditor often goes backwards. Okay, now the big thing for everyone, what's probably of most interest, is what's going to happen for the rest of this program year. Okay, so we've got information from the department that they were very happy to invite 2,490 in December, 2,490 in January. Our figures show around 1,600 of those were real applications. The other 800-900 are going to be wasted ones. Now the comments from the department are that they considered that a very good number to invite given the pipeline of cases, that's existing applications, they already have lodged for the 189 visa. So they're just looking to top it up a little bit, and they think that's an ideal number. In fact, their comments were it allows a steady flow of lodgements in order to best position the department to meet their current targets. So on that basis, we think they're really comfortable with that number, especially given the wasted invitations. It actually is not that many accepted anyway. And so we think that number will continue now for February, March, and probably April. And then May and June is going to be affected by the federal election. The department is not allowed to make major decisions in close to an election, so May and June is likely to be consistent with that. So our assumption now is 2,490 invitations each month for the 189, and a 60%, 40% split in favour of the pro rata, and again that table showing how many we think for each of the occupations. Okay folks, hope that all makes sense. We're going to put up new estimates based on those wastage figures after the 11th of February 2019 round, just in about a week and a half's time. Remember, if you want some quality help with your application, email us at any time to migration@iscar.com. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.